Welcome, everybody, to Brothers in Boots. I'm Mike,
I'm Jeff.
and today we will be talking to you about leather and some of the things that matter in leather when choosing your next pair of boots, whether that be a stock boot, an MTO boot, or looking at different makers and what options that they provide. First things first, when you're picking out a pair of boots, is determining value of leather. Leather does a number of things and gives you a number of options when it comes to flexibility, support, how your boots generally break in, how water resistant they are. There's no such thing as waterproof in leather boots. If you need waterproof, you definitely want to go with galoshes. And overall,
Amen.
how you will feel in wearing them, right? Two biggest factors that most people are going to run into are going to be your thickness and your temper. But there are other things that matter, like your leather liner and other choices that you make. Number of things that are stitched on that overall contribute to how stiff to how soft a boot is overall. So,
Should we start with thickness
yeah,
or
yeah, leather thickness is a good one because boots will generally range. There are going to be some brands that are thinner, but generally you're looking around 4 to 4.5 ounces to, in Bison's case, 9 to 10 ounce. Generally speaking, most of your brands are going to be around that 4.5 to 7.8, with some exceptions depending on some of them leather choices. But the good news
and
is,
depending on the level? I mean, a lot of off the shelf stuff is going to be like in the 3 ounce range. So
that is true, especially if we're talking like cement construction boots. That's probably and I guess even sneakers technically too. They're going to be in that 2.5 to 3 ounce range as well, right around that just what, like 1.8 millimeters. So when we talk about thickness in ounces, it's a specific rating for leather. It corresponds. You can look up any chart on the internet for it. It corresponds specifically to a we'll say millimeters in this case because most leather is measured in millimeters. It's going to correspond to a millimeter rated thickness, and different layers of thickness are going to depend on how much your boot flexes, how much your floppy your boot is. Thinner leathers tend to be a little bit more on the floppier side, even with stiffer tempers. And overall, it kind of gives you a general sense of what you can do in your boots, right? So, like, you and me, Jeff, our boots are used in a more casual way, not necessarily the most extreme job conditions. I do use my boots for work, but that is not an everyday occurrence for me. When I do, it's 10 to 12-hour days, sometimes 14 on the extreme in the data center on my feet the entire day, going up and down ladders, lifting and moving servers. But for the most part, it is, used around the house, daily errands, so on and so forth. So for someone like me, 4 to 6 ounces is generally where I like to land and where I find most leather does good. I have stuff thicker. I don't have anything thinner than 4.5 ounce. That's the thinnest I have. But I lean into the slightly heavier tempers. So for me, going a little bit thinner with heavier tempers brings out some positive benefits.
I brought up a chart really quick that you might be able to put up on the screen, but I just quickly Googled leather
Oh man,
weight,
yeah.
leather thickness ounces. It just shows a quick example that anybody could Google quickly that shows uh, a conversion between ounces and inches and millimeters for thickness. But
Yep. I'll go ahead and pull that up
every
here really
industry
quick.
has their different every industry has their different terms that they use for different things, and ounces is what the leather industry uses. If we're talking about jewelry or piping or something like that, then we might be talking about gauge. Wiring, we'd be talking about gauge. That's another example of something that certain industries will use to give a measurement in a term that's familiar for that industry.
Exactly. Plating is a big one that gauges use steel plates, and ironically, we actually still use one plate measurement in boots for oak bark tanned midsoles, insoles, and heel lifts. We use the iron scale, which The irons correspond to old European iron plates that are a specific thickness that they would put the skiving knife against to skive it down to that thickness. And I'll pull that up as well so that people can see. You already saw that ounce to leather gauge. I'm now going to show you a iron to ounce gauge, which is very similar. So on this chart, you'll see the 1 through 16 ounces, and you'll see the irons that it amounts to. Now, in most American makers, your midsole is going to be somewhere between a 7.5 iron and an 11 iron. So your Pacific Northwest brands lean into the 11 iron or slightly smaller. Now, keep in mind, leather is a living organism, so 11 iron is just generally speaking. There might be areas a little higher, areas a little lower, especially once they sand the finished rough out off, because most oak bark tan leather comes with a very burnished down rough out that's very fuzzy if you don't sand it off. So it takes a little bit to get that off. It'll make the differences slightly, inconsistent. But this isn't machinist grade measurements here. We're averages work just fine in leather. We're not trying to, make two perfectly seated metal parts sit next to each other and not leak oil. We're wrapping leather around our feet.
The other area that boots will use irons as their thickness is for the slip soles.
Yep.
And a typical slip sole is going to be about 4 irons, and a heavy duty slip sole might be 8 irons. Those are the only two that I ever really noticed being used, but I suppose there are other thicknesses that different builders could be using that I'm unfamiliar with.
I think you're pretty. I think I've seen a couple 2-iron ones, but that's just for people that are worried about adhesion, because leather to rubber doesn't have the strongest adhesion. But overall, I would say either 4 or 8 iron is probably the most common used. And if I remember right, I'm pretty sure Vibram is generally the main supplier of those. And I doubt Vibram has a ton of options available that people aren't special ordering. It just doesn't seem like their MO. They're pretty specific about their choices and like what they want to offer. But anyway, so
what thicknesses?
Yep.
So we got a lot of the cheaper ones, like we said, probably about 2 to 3 ounces. The heavier duty MTO and work boots on the higher end, we might be looking at that same thickness just for the insole leather, for the inside liner leather.
Yeah, the steer hide that Frank's uses is 3 to 3.5 ounce, and then the liners that they use can be anywhere from 3 ounce to, I think they have a 5 ounce that they don't normally use. That was when they had the ostrich and kangaroo in.
Premium leather, typical premium leather might be like 5 to 7, probably most typically in the 5.5 to 6 range. And that's usually the situation where they're going to use the leather liners that we just mentioned so that they can get it up to a thicker work leather and a stand up.
Yep, especially if it's got a softer temper. You might even find in some of the thick leathers like bison that people go leather liner just for a stiffer overall feel or a more supportive feel, because even though bison can top the scales at 10 ounce, it's very, very low on the temper scale. When we talk temper, this is an important note. This is the stiffness of the leather. How much the leather holds itself up in support. Does your shaft want to collapse in on itself? Does it want to fall over on its side? Like something like the lightest temper is deer skin. It's usually around a 1 to a 2 on the scale, and you'll never see a pair of deerskin boots, even with the deerskin doubled up, that will hold itself up or hold any kind of shape whatsoever. They will always, like, they're expecting the liner to be 100% the source of support, whereas like a bison is going to be around a 3 to a 4. Chrome XL, which most people are familiar with, the Dublin and most of the Horween range is going to be between a 4 and a 6. And then your Italian leathers are going to be 6 to 8. Your Seidel is going to be right around the 7 mark if you're ordering from Frank's. Most of the other Seidel makers like White's, Nick's, and JK are actually getting into the 4 and 5 range with their Seidel. That's like the 1964 line, and the stuff that White's is now using, like in the smoke jumper, the they use the same leather in everything these days, but they used to kind of have like a slightly lower ounce, lighter temper for their lifestyle, but now they're just doing the same for everything. They just line their work boots if they need to make them stiffer, which is one benefit of going with someone like Frank's, is they do go with the stiffer leathers. Now, are the stiffer leathers for everybody? No. Some of stiffer leathers are a preference thing. Some of them are a requirement. For your most extreme jobs, 100% a requirement.
Yeah. The are you are you working a ranch? Are you having stuff bumping up against you all the time? Are you scraping your boots against things all the time? Are you working around stuff that might leave sparks and burns that are going to come down, that you need the leather to be able to hold up to? Or are you just kicking around something, big metal things and servers in a server room? But not everybody needs the same thickness. Thickness is going to wear better. It's going to last longer, but it's also going to be harder to break in, and it might be less comfortable for the casual wearer.
Absolutely. In the same note on that is, when we talk about thickness and temper, maybe you have a really extreme job like a wildland fighter fire, an arborist, a lineman, a logger. These are guys that need that 7 to 8 ounce leather, and might be advantageous to get the extra temper, even though it's a 7 on the temper scale, for a leather lining to push that temper up to an 8 or a 9, especially to deal with their climbing equipment that is abrasive and damaging to the boots as well.
Well, and one factor to that is it's right now is immediately is the whole life of the boot. But the other factor to that is lifespan. If you're going to be putting your boots up to that kind of work for the life of the boot, then if you went with a stiffer temper, that boot's going to last longer before you need to do a rebuild or before you need to replace it. Which is the trade-off, right? I mean, there's companies out there, there's Spokane brands that are going with a softer temper because they want to have an easier break-in for the customer. They want their customer to be happier right off the bat. They want their customer to have that sneaker feeling that people talk about, or slipper feeling that people talk about. And people think it's great that they got this quick break-in with a good temper. But they might not be realizing that they may have just traded off 30% of the lifespan of their boot, because that lighter temper is going to die on them quicker. It's going to need replacing quicker or rebuilt quicker.
Exactly. Or if they use climbing gear specifically, I think it might be more than 30%. I'm thinking it's probably closer to 60, because the softer it is, the faster those stiff pieces on the climbing gear are going to cut into it. Like, that part of that temper is resisting, any kind of climbing gear you have on it. If you have like, for example, say you wear those like Hoffman packs that you can clamp on over the top of your boot, that's rubber, that's going to hold water and stuff there, and that rubber is not going to lose temper or shape as you grind back and forth against it, wearing it in like heavy snow conditions or heavy water conditions. These are important factors when it comes to work boots. Not so much an important factor if you're going to get a coffee, but everyone's allowed to wear boots. It's just, what do you wear them for, and how comfortable are they? Because as Jeff mentioned, some of these extreme jobs get extra things sewn onto that leather that you might never break in without wearing that gear.
Very true. Some people will put it on there because it looks good, but certainly going to make it harder to break in as well.
Yep. It's not always the
Yeah,
splash
the other factor with the temper isn't necessarily just the lifespan or what you're putting it through, which are probably the two most important, maybe. But the third factor that not everybody thinks about is that with a stiffer boot, it's only breaking in where your foot, your leg, your calf actually need it to. It's not going to break in the other places. And that's pretty important too. If you've got a soft temper, it's breaking in everywhere easily. It's bending everywhere initially easily, which means that it's not necessarily breaking where you specifically need it. So a stiffer temper is going to break into your foot and give you a more customized fit than that softer temper ever will.
Exactly. And then when we start talking about creases and the gunk and the dirts and the slurries that get into those creases and cause those micro abrasives that break your leather down, more creases you have, more wear points you have to break through the leather, more stuff gets into it, dirtier and gunkier they get. It can lead to you doing, especially if you're not diligent about cleaning your boots, better long-term damage. I mean, number one thing, most people over-condition their boots. Keeping them clean is much more important than keeping them conditioned. Obviously, if you're talking to a wildland firefighter that's literally walking through burning embers, their experiences do not compare to the rest of us. That's that's a job where 2 years, it doesn't matter how good you do with your boots, they're ready for a rebuild. There's just nothing they can do. Like, they're choosing leathers that are at a certain price point to give the support that's needed while maximizing the benefit of the boot.
Absolutely. Let's see what else. So we've covered thickness then, right?
Yep.
So
Covered temper pretty well too.
we,
I mean, I could
and
show.
10 is
Good.
10 is higher end. It's very rare we're going to see anything more than 10.
10 is
When
only
you
possible over
when you
10
get
ounce.
to anything that's really more than 8, that builder is going to have to do skiving at the stitch points anyway, so that they can even stitch it together, because it's
And
too much
last
for
it.
the machine to
Yeah,
handle.
and last it too, because now it's not going to want to bend over the lasting points as well. I mean, the only leather these days that I've seen them make a boot out of that's above an 8 is Shinky. And Shinky always feels roomier because you just can't pull it over the last. It just fights you a little too much. And Shinky also does come in thicker. The thinnest I've seen is the natural that I have at 7.5 ounce, but Shinky usually tops in about 8 to 9. And to get a 10, I don't think anything under 10 ounce can be a 10.
Not on horse.
Well, no, not on any leather. I mean, I think maybe a 10 ounce oak bark tan might be able to come up with a 10, but you'll never be able to wrap it around a last to get I mean, you could get a square boot out of it. We can get a Minecraft boots going here.
My green Wicket and Craig
Ooh,
boots,
zucchini, I have it too.
and,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean that is 10 ounces. That's every bit of 10 ounces, and the temper is insanely stiff. So that was a hard boot to build. They had to do a lot of skiving at the joints, the edges for that boot, and it took forever to break in as well.
Oh yeah, I actually got my 10 ounce zucchini rebuilt just because I was dumb and did it in a wedge, which is the least flexible of the soles. So it doubled down on the non flexibility of that boot. Where because a wedge boot requires the upper to do a lot more of the movement, just due to how thick the wedge is in the beginning, versus some of the more traditional soles. But yeah, that 10 ounce zucchini was not a wise choice. I know they had a ton of issues even lasting them in the first place.
The crew was not happy about it, from what I heard.
Yeah, no, I was told they'll never buy that zucchini again. If they do, it will be split this time. And I think they actually did reorder it because somebody else did get another boot in it. But
It's a beautiful leather, but it's a daring leather,
it
and
is.
you know you got to have a daring customer like us, I guess.
And know what
But
they're getting into. The only thing I've had in that pretty of a green color is that Blackborough Buttero green from Caricia Walper, and that's a 8 on the
that was
temper
cool.
scale. It's only 6 ounces and it is 8 on the temper scale, and it's a pretty stiff leather. Probably wasn't the smartest choice to get a monkey boot in it, but we'll see how that goes once the Thunderdome's done.
it's those colors can be hard to wear and to justify, and green's a hard color to get right as well. There are different shades that look great, but and if I had to think of any color out there that's harder to get a color shade right on,
Maybe
I
red.
can't think of one.
Maybe red and leather.
Red looks great in all shades. Fire engine red looks great. I mean, you might not be daring enough to wear it, but it looks great. Burgundy looks great. I mean, I can't think of a shade that looks bad. And I guess if you got a shade, I guess if you ended up close enough to pink,
Balassi Carlo does
then
do
we'd
the
call it
pink. Yeah.
then
I
we'd call it pink.
Well, that's true too. I guess maybe I'm pickier with red than I am with green, but red's always the one that I struggle because I've got some cool red colors going through, and you've seen some of the stuff. You also got those red kilties that I had Dale send you for the waxy to go with the
Yeah.
Palisades. I don't know if I would do a whole boot in that red, but like I said, that leather, the water buffalo leather that both me and Art have, and that crazy cow samba I have going through. Those are the only reds I've found that I actually really like that aren't heavy brown leaning. Um, there's one that I got coming from Dennis at Custom Craft. It's a Cobel russet harness. It's a real red color from Cobel leather in northern Germany. So we'll see how that one goes. That might be another red shade that works out. But like I don't really care. Like that London bus red Cavalier Chrome XL. I don't care for that red. That red doesn't do it for me. There's something about it that seems medicinal.
I like the Cavalier. I hadn't seen the red. I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah,
But
Knob had, or it's either Knob or Yoshi had Nyx make a mock toe in it for Christmas one year. They did a green slip sole and everything that matched up with it. But yeah, it's London bus red.
I don't think I'm daring enough for red anymore. I used to be. I definitely used to be. I used to be daring enough for oranges, like a bright orange as well. Not the Predator orange. That's
Yeah, yeah,
not very
the
daring.
Oro Legacy, the mock toe from Red Wing, that kind of bright orange.
But I've seen some bright orange before, and I've owned some bright orange. I had a pair of Timberlands from back in the day when they were still made all in the United States. They're 6 inch premium. I had a bright orange leather pair of those things. I just loved. I'm just I can't wear those colors anymore, really. I don't find myself being that daring anymore. Maybe if I still had Washington Capitals hockey tickets and we like to rock the red. I mean, I could certainly justify if I was still going to all the hockey games, owning a pair of red boots to wear to the games, because then I'd be along like freaks. But generally speaking, I don't think I can wear all red anymore. I really look forward to the kiltie you sent me to go with my blue boots that I just got. The blue boots are also white, so doing that red, white, and blue, all patriotic and shit. I look forward to seeing how that's going to look.
I do think that's going to work out pretty well. I haven't got my blue Palisades yet, but I think that's going to be a good combination that works together well, especially with the small amount of red you're going to see outside of the jean cuff. So,
Very true.
so we've covered
Um,
some color, we've covered temper, we've covered thickness. Really, we've kind of glossed over leather lining a little bit and talked about that, but the two or three real big things we haven't talked about is the different tannages of leather, right? So your chrome tans versus your veg tans, and then you could call oil tan a type, but oil tan falls under a chrome tan or a veg tan. There's no like just pure oil tan that's a different style. And generally speaking, work boots you're going to
and
lean
then you've got the ones that are multiple.
Oh yeah, that's right. Dual tannages that are they'll either say like 50% chrome tan and then 50% vegetable retan or 20% chrome tan, 75% vegetable retan. Generally, I would say most of those you'd probably still call chrome tan since they have chromium salts in them, which is important because like gun holsters, people with chrome allergies, you can't do any chrome tan leather in the boot at all, which is that's not even just the liner and the upper, that's going to be the tongue, that's going to be the slips or the sock liner, and the any kind of like backstay cover if you happen to have a backstay cover or a different lining that's not like a Pacific Northwest brand that the counter cover is internal. Those are things that have to be considered as well.
So how much do you want to talk about the combo? Because I mean that kind of gets interesting. I mean that's where you've got the Harween CXL, which to a lot of newbies is what the only leather and the only tannery.
Yeah, that
The
that's
end all be all.
yeah, that is true. I mean, that's not a leather. I own one Chrome XL boot at this point that's not Chrome XL horse, and it's not high up on my list. Like Chrome XL's definitely a good starter leather. It's a good new boot owner leather, but it's definitely a leather most of us, especially with Horween's limited range of colors, is probably not going to keep long term. In the chrome tan space is definitely a more work function leather. It's going to be more water resistant. It's going to be a little less abrasion and puncture resistant, but it's also going to be a little bit more purpose made. So they make chrome tans in more tempers, more thicknesses, and more variances to do specific jobs. Like the tongue gusset, if it's not a matching leather, 9 times out of 10 is going to be a chrome tan leather because that's an application where for the tongue, that makes significantly more sense than using a much stiffer veg tan leather because it's a tongue, right? Like if anyone that's bought a shinky boot from Indonesia knows that you get a shinky tongue, and shinky tongues are an absolute disaster to break in. You get a 7 to 9 ounce tongue leather that might or may not have a gusset that now has to be squished, that is resisting wanting to squish in on itself, that has starts with a 1/2 inch gap of the gusset that won't close unless you grab a pair of pliers and give it some squish.
Well, Chrome Excel is also easier as far as being weatherproof, and weatherproof is something that somebody with boots is going to want, especially if they don't want to take care of them.
Yep. Yeah, no, Chrome Excel definitely excels there, and that's one of the that's probably like the number one benefit of Chrome Tan besides the speed of the Chrome tanning process, which has nothing to do with us as consumers, only has to do with the tannery of getting products out. Because if we're being honest, most chrome tan products are just as expensive as their veg tan counterparts these days, especially if it's a quality chrome tan. You're not saving a ton of money. Horween and Wicket and Craig's prices are pretty close.
And they shouldn't be.
Correct.
I don't think that they should be. I mean, that tannery is spending days instead of weeks tanning that product.
Yeah, it's the vegetable retan.
Veg tan takes a lot longer.
Yeah, so Wicket and Craig takes 6 to 9 weeks start to finish for the process, including dyeing, finishing, and if you choose to have the backside finished, right? And in the case of Horween, the chrome tanning process before they add any dyes to it is only 3 days. It's the 6 weeks of vegetable retanning that take time, where they also infuse all the oils and finish it and dye it. But even then, if we take a 6-week product like Chrome XL, I can take a 16-week product like Badalassi Carlo. It's all double shoulder. That's the same price for a hide, almost the same square footage. Like Chrome XL is usually 210 to 240. Badalassi Carlo's right around 220, and it's all double shoulder, all usable, 16-week full vegetable tan. So you're right. Because if we talk Seidel's leathers in the case of chrome tanned, they're usually closer to like the $140, $160 a hide. A third cheaper, essentially.
Right.
And then in vegetables,
that's their market. And
yep.
It's what the market will bear.
Well, and keep in mind, Horween makes the leather for baseballs, the leather for footballs, the leather for basketballs. They've got products that, and then not counting their world famous shell cordovan, which the only company that even touches it with 10-foot stick is Shinky. I mean, Ricardo and Merriam are getting closer. But I mean, they're still the king of shell cordovan, hands down. Originally used.
Damn shame that none of those hides translate very well into boots. Like the sports balls, a baseball glove material, basketball material, football material.
I think it's because most of them are way too soft on the temper. To be 100% honest, they would just be too floppy. You know, most of them are usually pebble grained, which means they're tumbled. That's why they have the grip texturing to them. So that alone is going to make it just not as supportive or have a particularly long life. I mean, footballs really aren't meant to be used for a whole football game, let alone worn on someone's foot for 2 years.
It's true. It's also pretty stiff, though. I've heard it's. I don't know how that temper works on that then, because
That one's too thin for a boot leather. It's a basketball that's a lot softer. It's basketball and baseball
okay.
that the leather's softer. The pig skin, which is actual real pig, that they use for the football, isn't
It's
super
not.
thick. It's like 2.5 ounces. It's just too thin.
It hasn't been pig skin in over a century.
Oh, sorry, imitation pig skin is what I should say. It's meant to look like pig skin. And I say pig, boar specifically.
We got oak bark tanning,
Yep, not
which
done in the
makes the
United
much
States
much
anymore.
thicker insole stuff and heel stuff.
Yep, it's
But that
significantly
is a
harder.
type of tanning.
Yep. It's a vegetable tan. It falls under the vegetable tan category, but it's a specific vegetable tan. Um, so there, most U.S. makers and even abroad makers have oak tannins in their vegetable tan products. Maybe it's not the main product. A lot of times that's birch oil or pine tar. But oak bark tanning specifically refers to the fact that the process takes 14 months and it's in a pit with oak bark. Now, there's other ingredients of every company's special sauce that goes in there, but the idea is it's supposed to be in there for 14 months. So when we say oak bark tanned leather, we're referring to a specific longer length process that's a subcategory of vegetable tanning.
Yeah, it's still vegetable tanning, but I mean it's really more bark tanning, even though bark seems it falls technically under vegetable.
Yeah, they just don't. What they do is they don't strip the tannins out. So, like when they do traditional vegetable tanning, they will remove all the solids of the materials that go in. With oak bark tanning, they don't remove the solids. They throw the materials in as they are. And I'm sure it's a speed thing. That's my guess is if you go pure liquid, it makes the process faster. I mean, the fastest veg tan produced is like 6 to 9 weeks, and that's a pretty fast veg tan. Most of your quality veg tans are closer to 6 months.
In an effort to be thorough, we can talk about brain tanning as well.
Well, I mean, there's also cedar tanning that isn't done anymore either, which is like what most of the original favorite P&W brands like to use is cedar tanned leathers. But that hasn't been a thing since the 70s because most cedar becomes fence now instead of chips and stuff to be used in the tanning process.
I think the only time brain tanning is still ever used is with bison, I think is what I've read. I think some bison is still brain tanned. But even at that, I believe it's a minority. I don't think law does.
No, they're chrome.
I don't think law does any brain tanning at all.
Galoon
As an
might.
example of a tannery that does a lot.
Yeah, Galoon might. I don't know if they do anymore or not. They might. Um, I'll have to look up and see if anybody still does brain tanning, or if I can find any leather for sale that's advertised as brain tanned. I'll have to see.
Neat little gimmick. I don't know anything about it to say whether it's better or worse or longevity or I have no clue. I just know that in my studies and conversations with people, I know that brain tanning has come up as an option that is occasionally used for bison. But nobody's been able to tell me what tannery. Nobody's been able to give me any kind of percentage. I have no idea.
That makes sense. And that's a good point too, because like why do these tanning methods matter? Because the volume of stuff tanned in it affects the price of it. Like when you get into these very rare tans, you drive the price up. Like if we talk Horween, right? The majority of their products are 50 chrome, 50 veg retan if they're retanned. But when you talk their Cypress and Predator, those are only 25% chrome tanned, 75% veg tanned, and they do way less on the finishing process to compensate to make the hide the same price. If they did the same amount of finishing they did to Chrome XL, that hide would be another six. It'd basically be doubling prices, which is about 310. I mean, so it's a trade-off.
Right.
We're picking realities that exist within keeping them, business functional. And that doesn't even count like sourcing hides, right? Most calf is sourced from Europe. And, some of the arguably better casual hides come from Europe these days too. Just due to, you get better yields out of the hides. They don't tan the pieces you're not going to use. I mean, no one wants a pair of boots that's made with shoulder. Or sorry, you want a pair of boots made with shoulder. I meant to say you don't want a pair of boots made with belly. Nobody wants a pair of boots made with belly.
You almost say it like it's almost a new thing or like it's surprising. I mean, Europe's the old world. It shouldn't be surprising at all that we've got tanneries over there that have been perfecting all sorts of different things for long periods of time. I mean, there's lots of incredible Italian tanneries that have been around for ages.
Oh, I mean, the Italian leather
England's got their own as well.
has been around 700 years. I think the more popular tanneries these days are, most of them started up in the 70s when a lot of the big tanneries broke apart into more specialties. I'd say it is in not surprising that it's, arguably better. It's just no one really uses them. Besides Japan, who loves their Badalassi Carlo, especially in the Minerva variety, the American boot makers that most of us look at, like your Thursday Boots, your Wolverine, Oak Street Bootmakers, Truman, Parkhurst, Caswell, Nick's Boots, White's Boots, Frank's Boots, even Julian Boots down in San Diego, you're going to see mostly having Horween lineups, Wicket and Craig lineups, which, to be fair, weren't super popular 5 years ago. They've become significantly more popular these days. And you're going to see there's a France tannery that I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name. People call it AJ. That's the main source of like French calf, and that's what you saw the majority of stuff being made from. In the U.S. now, like Grant Stone has models in Badalassi. I think they maybe have ran a little bit of CF Stead and Walper. You see Truman running CF Stead, but short of that, I mean, it's mostly a Horween, Wicket and Craig, and then Lafarque. You're never going to see the name Lafarque on anything. But if it's not labeled what tannery it comes from, it just says Mexican tannage. It's most likely Lafarque or Miliata Tilliers.
Most likely. Not something any of them want to advertise, but it does a decent job.
Yeah.
It's like you said. I mean, it's the choices get made based on cost and availability and relationships and the order quantities that they'll let you order from. Wickett and Craig is doing a great job because A, they've been around forever, but B, they still don't make people buy in huge quantities. So the smaller guy still has the chance to be able to order some great hides from them.
Yep.
Whereas
you and me can
probably
order single hides from them. If I know two of the representatives, we could go order single hides from them with specifications, which is not something most tanneries do. Even the small ones are usually 10 hide minimums, but Wickett and Craig, we could literally go order singles.
if you're talking to people who know leather, I expect the answer for the biggest, most important tannery in America to be one that none of us even talk about, Herman Oak.
Yep.
I bet Herman Oak's bigger than Horween. I think it's bigger than Wickett and Craig, but we don't hear about it. Why? Because I think they've got like 25 hide minimums, maybe 50 hide minimums. I mean, the minimums
they're
are
big.
through the roof.
It's 500 square feet, whatever it takes to get 500 square feet, and even then, you've got to go in somebody else's order. You don't get to pick. You just can purchase at 500 square feet. I think you have to order 1,500 square feet to be able to choose. Now Herman Oak is going to be like saddles and stuff that they don't order from Horween, That's going to be more like Herman Oak doesn't hardly make anything you could really make a pair of boots out of. The closest thing, we would own, unless you have a bunch of horses in your backyard in Maryland that I don't know about, is belts.
We do.
Yep.
We've also got a lot of ponies. Look up the Chincoteague and the Assateague ponies.
Oh, I meant like you had an actual farm in your backyard.
No, Maryland did have a lot of horse farms.
Oh, yeah.
Still has a decent amount of horse farms.
Yeah, I mean, there's horses right across the street from me, but they're not my horses, so I obviously don't own a saddle to go ride them. But that's what I mean. It's like, unless you own a saddle or okay, or you have
When you
lots
go
of Western.
when you went on the
Good.
when you went for a joyride as a kid, was it a car or a horse?
Well, when I was a kid, we actually had horses, so it was both. But that's back when we still lived on 10 acres. We only live on 2 now. But now I guess one exception to that would be Western tooled gear. So like things that have been hand stamped in a Western theme, which could be like a satchel bag, a vest, you name it. Western themed gear, maybe a belt with a holster, for like a Wild West themed show. That would be another example of Herman Oak. In terms of volume, just because of like the basketball, football, baseball, Rawlings glove thing, I think the highest volume is still Horween by a big chunk. But it's definitely not for boot leather. It's definitely for other things that they do besides boot leather. Because most of the stuff we use for boot leather, that wasn't its original purpose. Shell cordovan, those weren't originally for dress shoes and work boots. Those were razor strops. Chrome XL was gasket material, originally for head gaskets on cars and then for airplanes. They used it a lot in airplanes because it was easy to compress and the oil did well in high altitudes before modern rubbers were able to win the day there. I mean, these weren't the original purposes. Latigo or Latigo, whichever way you pronounce it, is a wet mold leather. It was originally the seat of a saddle. It was meant to form the seat of the saddle.
I've used leather to make a gasket before. Guilty.
Yeah, once again, a car in the 20s would have been using a Chrome XL head gasket.
Sometimes you use what you got.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, the correct thing that fits. Sometimes it's a roll of cork. Sometimes it's a roll of leather.
Yep.
Sometimes it's rubber. I've used just about everything to make gaskets playing in the garage in my lifetime. But yeah, I mean, I guess going back to I think where we were, you go with what's easy, you go with where the relationships are, or you go with if there's a specific thing that you want or a specific thing that you need. Your customer wants kangaroo. You want to use ostrich. I guess that's another conversation. We start talking about various hides that get used, but that's another factor that's going to decide where people buy from.
Yep. And it's, all of this is important. I mean, maybe it's not as important to the consumer, but it is important to the bootmaker because all of these choices are going to heavily affect their production process and what they need to do and how they need to pattern. Because, for example, kangaroo is considered one of the perfect leathers. You can do almost everything with it. It's buttery soft. It's got a fairly good temper. It holds stitching well. It holds its form well. It's super duper common in high-end cowboy boot shafts. It also could be used for the vamp. But kangaroo leather comes at a price, and it comes at a trade-off to thickness too, right? I mean, you're not going to find kangaroo leather. I think the thickest I've ever seen is 3 ounce. But it's a very strong.
You don't need it to be thick, and that's part of what's going on.
Yep.
It's so strong for its thickness, per square inch of thickness, per square ounce.
Well, it's also super
This is
strong.
the way we
split
should be
too.
saying it.
Yep. Well, so the biggest downside to bovine, or just cow in general, is as you split it down to various thicknesses, it loses a ton of strength. Like cow loses almost 98% of its strength by the time you split it down to 4 ounce. Kangaroo only loses about 50% of its strength by the time you split it down to 1 ounce in the same proportions. That's probably the greatest strength of kangaroo. So it makes it very puncture resistant. But that strength also means it, is way more susceptible to abrasives. It's going to cut into a lot easier and go through quicker because it holds itself up against the abrasive. And that lack of thickness works against you. That's ties back to when we were talking about thicknesses and tempers earlier, is as you get into the thicker or the higher tempers, you've got to add some thickness to it because things like abrasives do become a problem when it doesn't fold in on itself to fight, taking damage from the abrasion.
And I guess a lot of people don't realize it. Maybe they do, but kangaroo's biggest use that I see is probably for soccer shoes, cleats.
And bull whips as well. Most bull whips are braided kangaroo.
I guess it's hard. Well, obviously it's hard for us to get kangaroo. They don't grow domestically.
Yeah, they don't allow us to tan it in the United
No,
States.
for
It's
us.
illegal. Yep. That's downside. So most of the kangaroo we get these days, especially if it's made in a pair of boots, comes from Merriam. But there are other tannages that do it. If I had to guess, it's most likely one of the no-named Italian consortium ones that do soccer shoes. And it's probably been a group that's been doing that kind of tanning. Maybe not kangaroo specifically, but at least tanning in general for 300 or 400 years. Because the group Merriam broke off of is one of the originals that's, over 600 years old.
Oh, where are we at now? I think
I think for an
we started to
overweight
cover
male.
different tanneries by accident.
Yeah. Well,
I guess
it's
that was
leather. It's
kind of a
leather.
category.
It is, and it's leather too, right? It's one of those things that, leather is really one of the most important choices when it comes to a boot. And we haven't even talked about like how color plays into that, but if you take away nothing else from this, choose your tannery, your tannage, your temper, and your thickness first, and then find the color you want second. It's always the best way of going about it.
Can't argue with that. Certainly. Yeah, I agree.
Especially when you can
Um,
do cool things like Creosote Boots does, where he orders his hides specially. They all come in the russet color, which is what Rickett and Craig calls natural, even though russet doesn't sound like it'd be natural. And everything's hand dyed of his. So it gives him the flexibility of basically ordering a perfect
that's
hide the way he wants it.
that's yeah. That depends on how much you trust your tannery, and it depends on what your size is. But yeah, the smaller guys, if you get something that's natural colored or close to natural colored, you can see all the bad spots in that leather rather than it being hidden. If you did a black, it's all going to be hidden and you can't see it. So that's a way for that tannery to push off a hide on you that might not be as good.
And they will. They absolutely will. That's that's the downside of black. Is anything that comes out black is most likely a subpar hide that they were able to refinish well enough for you to not see until you last it, and then you're gonna see it.
And it's too late.
Yep.
So what brands? We mentioned Merriam. Merriam's a great one that focuses a whole lot on horse. We've got Chinky,
Yep. Another horse
I guess
exclusive.
another horse exclusive, very high line. CF Steed, we mentioned in England.
Yep.
They do a lot of Kudu.
Kudu suede
I think
splits.
they do a lot of interesting things, but Kudu is the only one that's really strongly coming to mind that they do. They obviously work with a lot of calf and regular cow as well.
So
They
there.
supply a lot of those UK brands from
Mm-hmm.
Northampton.
Yes, a ton of them. So the unique thing about Stead is they do two things differently than everybody else. One, they're the only tannery I'm aware of that does double rump for cow, that cuts the double rump off and makes stuff out of it. That is going to be their splits like Waxy Commander, Rambler, Mohawk, Crazy Cow, and these are all going to be like crazy vibrant colors. They're going to be Slade splits that are waxed on one side or have some kind of, I don't want to call it fashionable, but some kind of aesthetically pleasing finish on them that's going to, either have tons of pull up or reveal another color underneath or mixes 3 or 4 colors together. Like they have a really popular stone color that's a combination of grays, browns, and blacks all mixed onto one hide. And to various degree as you move throughout the hide, that's supposed to represent like a very natural, stone face. But they are going to be exclusively.
The UK has an awful lot of smaller, mid-size
Oh yeah.
boot factories that are doing, and like you said, I fashion is a weird word that probably isn't understood the same by everybody listening, but there's a lot of places in Northampton that's making some pretty interesting hides and interesting boots where the hide is the big difference. Sometimes the hide is the biggest thing that's differentiating what they've done from what their neighbor has done.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about sneakers specifically, which that really falls into, you're 100% right. But I would say boots are that way too. If you're not talking like heavy P&W customizations, the only differentiating thing besides the leather in most of your traditional service boot styles is the last. And for a lot of those guys, they're using very similar lasts. So really, the leather choice is the only differentiating factor. And you can see this with the rise of Truman boots. But like they're the U.S. tannery known for using, like, usually having 15 different hides and colors in production at all times.
I think at one point when Doc Martens was most popular and actually making a boot worth buying, and everything that they made was out of the UK. I think at one point they were contracting with like a dozen different cobblers at any given time to make their boots for them, which means that they need to have those lasts in order to make those boots for them.
Yep.
So, like you said, I mean, a lot of those guys are operating off of the same lasts.
Yeah, I think Solaver was their main provider for a long time, and Solaver still makes a boot that looks kind of like Doc Martens, and they do a lot more interesting colors, I think, than Docs do these days. But I'm not a huge.
They're hand over fist better, or they're a billion times better. It's very unfortunate that Doc Martens won that lawsuit on the colors of the threads on the outside.
Oh, is that why they can't do
And
the?
as
the
I
yellow?
understand it, Doc Marten owns the yellow, and matter of fact, it wasn't just the yellow. I would have thought if a lawsuit was going to take place and they were going to win, that the lawsuit might say, "Well, yellow is our staple, and that's what we're fighting for." And I would have figured that Solaver might lose and be told, "Well, you can't use yellow anymore," even though they used to. I used to own a pair of Solaver with yellow branded, but they actually won it on like all colors other than like black, gray, and white.
That's
like
ridiculous.
anything that's considered a color. So Solaver couldn't do a green thread if they wanted to. They couldn't do a red thread if they wanted to. Somehow, I don't know the exact wording, but Doc Marten won the rights for any interesting color.
any color that wouldn't put all the other makers out of business, huh? That is slightly ridiculous, I will say. But this is what happens. Vibrum's done the same thing with outsoles. They've bought out everybody that makes a decent outsole besides Dr. Soul and compressed their line down to nothing.
Don't get me started on Vibram. That's a Vibram, whatever. That's a whole different conversation.
Yep.
Oh, let's see. We talked about Sidel. We've talked about Horween several times. We've talked about Wicked and Craig several times. We have not mentioned Law, barely.
Yep.
And barely mentioned Gallon or Galun, which
yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, they used to be the same company and broke off.
They were part of the same association, but they're not part of the same association anymore. So there's a couple tanneries in that area that were all associated with each other. They operated under different LLCs, but yes, they used to do a lot of the shrinking and work for Law. I don't know if it was. I think it had to do with so Law isn't just bison, even though that's what they're known for. I think it had to do with a lot of their like calves and some of their other bovine stuff that Galoon specialized in. Because Galoon's stepping, foot into horse rump. They're doing lots of horse rump and trying to kind of be the de facto American maker. Because Horween only does their double horse front, which is not a good boot leather. Lots of people like it, but it's really not a super suitable boot leather. And then they do horse strip, and that's the majority of it, because everything else they do becomes a shell, right? Because that's the downside of horse rump, is anything that's horse rump is usually made because it wasn't a good shell cordovan candidate. Horween doesn't care about the sizes of their shells that much. They'll make a shell out of anything. But to be fair, shell commands a extremely large price tag compared to other stuff. Like the XL shells, which are right around 3 square feet, from Horween, those are between $430 and $460 each. And you need 3 to 4 of those for a like P&W pair of boots, and probably at least 2 of them for, your more standard models that don't need as many external components put on. So I mean, it's a expensive deal from that perspective. And the shells go down. There's a pricing that you have to go get from the tannery row and call them to get that. Because obviously, if you're ordering Horween, you're going to either order from the Tannery Row, Maverick Leather. I think there's one other U.S. website that sells, but a Tannery Row's in the same building as Horween, so they're kind of like their retail arm. But in the case of Galoon, they're trying to be one of the tanneries that's not just making shell out of the horse rumps. So maybe like a lot of the stuff that Horween would pass by on, that they wouldn't find usable for shell, that they'd want to spend money on, hopefully Galoon's buying that up and making horse rump out of it. There's a lot of R&D going on. They're trying to do some of the same shrinking processes that Shinky does to a certain extent. And they still have a good calf product, but I do know they get their calf hides from Europe. They do not use American calf hides. But they call it their Viking calf, and I think Trickers might have just ran Trickers, or somebody like Trickers ran a brogued model in their yellow Viking calf. So I know they helped on that side. I don't know if they're not doing any bison now. If they did do bison from the Galoon side, on the Law tanning side, obviously you have Bighorn and Palisades that most people are familiar with. They're Bighorns, which is their standard colors. They're Palisades, which are the special hides that are going to get the deep, big, and entrenched flakes that become whatever color of Palisades you want to order. You order a drum of
Right.
hot pink, you're going to get a drum of hot pink. And maybe they save a couple hides to sell to other people, but you've got to have an order big enough to demand that color. Obviously, most bootmakers aren't going to be buying entire drums for themselves because a drum of leather is somewhere usually between 55 and 60 hides. I mean, even somebody like Frank's, 55, 60 hides is probably almost a whole year worth of work boot leather, let alone upgraded leather.
It's a situation of relationships.
No.
We're kind of talking about before. Yeah, at Palisades, you're supposed to buy the whole entire drum. Uh, I guess if they got a customer that might say, "I'm going to buy a drum, but it wouldn't hurt my feelings if you let a few of the hides go to somebody else," or maybe they got a situation where they got a customer that they like maybe Frank's might be one of those, where they'll say, "Oh, we just had a customer do a run of such and such color. Do you want me to ask them if they'd be willing to let you buy a few of those hides out of that run?" And that's how you're going to see probably most of the Palisades come through, at least in our world.
Yeah.
It's people who are buying a whole drum and buying a whole run. They're going to be people that are buying, making the larger builders that are making boots that they sell to retailers and fill the shelves across America.
Yeah, pretty ready to wear models and stuff like that. I think there's probably a reality there if Law has a good customer that wants 2/3 of a drum, that they might be willing to take the risk on selling the last third themselves as well. might be another possibility that comes up. But I think it's going to be more conservative colors. I don't think you're going to get some of the wild colors they've done before.
You never know when they're going to come up.
That's
I'm always waiting. I got to keep money in the bank.
yeah. Hey, when Palisades comes to town, I mean, there's a red color, a purple color, and a green color that they have only run one time each. And we might never see those. And it's not the moss green like Frank's has for sale,
Right.
and that Nick's got. Nick's
Nick's.
got the olive in Palisades, like it's the actual Palisades flake, but it's not that same green color. It's very much an olive color. This was like an emerald forest green color, and they only ran it the one time. They've never any. I found scraps of it on eBay, but never enough to make a pair of boots out of.
And we saw scraps for the white as well, a run of white, but hadn't been able to see any actual runs out of it.
Yep.
Just scraps.
Yep, I found a box of red scraps and purple scraps on eBay too. But yeah, those are colors that haven't been run again, and maybe they'll get ran again one day. Maybe they won't. It's hard to tell. Palisades are one of those things.
Palisades is just something you have to. Yep, got to jump.
So.
Oh, we covered brands by accident, pretty much, without even having to do it as a category. We discussed temper, when you want the various stiffnesses, when you wouldn't, on longevity, etc. And it's that's another thing that's funny because we talk occasionally on our own quite a bit, and you're usually talking about liking the softer tempers because you're not putting them up to as much work, and because it's easier to break in and it's softer and more comfortable to wear. And it kind of sounds as if you think that most people would fall into that same category. And every time that you say it, and I don't, maybe I don't know if I've ever brought it up before or not, but what I'm always thinking in my head is all these people out here that are big fans of selvage jeans. And it's not my area of expertise by any means, but these people usually want to buy raw, unwashed, unfinished, stiff-ass jeans that they'll sometimes take Facebook photos of where the jeans are actually standing up on their own. And they actually want these things to be stiff as fuck so that they'll only end up bending exactly where that person's body needs it to bend. So if we've got that many selvage fans out there, why wouldn't we have that many people wanting a good stiff-tempered leather to act the same?
Well, I think in my case, I usually advocate for the thinner, higher temper leathers. So like in Balassi Carlos' case, it's a 6 or a 7 on the temper scale, but its thickness is thinner. I'm not a huge fan of like the deer skin or some of the real soft leathers in terms of temper. I think bison is about as soft as I can go, and I only give bison a pass because of its thickness, and I usually get it lined to kind of up the temper scale a little bit. Where I find most people have problems and don't like it, and where I'm not as big a fan of it, is when we start talking the 6, 7, 8s on the temper scale with a combination of 7 to 8 ounce thickness. Unless you want to prove that you can break it in or want the challenge, which like Shinky would be a great example of where this would fall. Like you've got to be ready for and willing to put in the work for Shinky. I don't think a lot of people order it. You see a lot of times the Indonesian makers, it goes up on Grailed and other sites for sale quickly because people wear it a couple times and realize like, nah, this is stupid. I don't even want to deal with this. It's very
Challenge accepted.
For the PNW guys, I don't think any of the PNW guys that have broken on in a couple pair of those are going to have any issues with it. But the average boot guy, because I mean, like I said, none of us want to admit it, right? Like, here's reality. Thursday Boots sells more boots than about anybody. Yes, it hurt me to say it. I am bleeding a little bit on the inside. But, I mean, this is the truth.
You know, we live in a world where everybody wants immediate
Gratification. Yeah, immediate gratification.
Gratification. And that's the way it is. We want it. We want it now. We want it yesterday. Don't wait 3 days to put it in the mail. I need it now. And that's a bad way of thinking. And even though I know better, I still fall into it sometimes. But we need to be willing to buy stuff that fits us, buy stuff that's made right, buy stuff that's made the way that we want it. And some people just, I don't know, they don't want to wait that long. They don't know that these brands are out there, that they have the ability to wait that long. But sure. And they advertise. And I don't know, different world.
It is.
Retail world, they got a lot of stores that they work with partners in. You can't get that in the made to order world.
100%. That's where the Indonesians, have their limits. The same with the PNW guys. There's definitely limits there, and I think that's where
And Nick is trying to head that way,
Oh yeah.
but
Well, I mean, White's got into Boot
I,
Barn and stuff, but I mean, they keep so little stock in the store of available sizes. It's basically a custom order from your local Boot Barn instead. And I think there's compromises that can be made there too for a lot of people. If you're willing to do the weight and you're willing to go to a company like Frank's, who will treat you right from that aspect, you can, get a more casual leather and use it for work. It can be done. I mean, there's nothing that says that a leather that's a little bit thinner but the same temper it is just going to, suddenly die quicker with what you're doing. It's keeping a certain level of temper and structure that's important. Some of the other details become way more important depending on what your job is, what you're doing with it, what your conditions are. A good example in P&W is smooth over rough out. If you ask any P&W person, they're going to give you a rough out lower and a smooth upper. That's how all their stock configurations come. If you work in concrete or any other dusty field, you are going to hate that boot with an absolute passion, and it's going to tear the bottom uppers up as it gets ingrained in there and becomes a micro abrasive that just wears into the grain faster than you could believe.
White's has some name recognition, but most of these don't have the name recognition. They don't have your advertising budget, advertising abilities, so it ends up being a word of mouth situation. And you're not going to sell a lot of boots that way. And then you add to that the fact that everybody wants it custom made, and you can't fill any shelves in that situation either.
Yep.
They're making them as fast as they can make them, and there's still big wait times.
Yep.
So you can't be filling shelves at such and such department store.
That's a good point. The other thing too with that is, P&W is generally like the most popular and known of people who have weird foot sizes, especially the wider widths. Sometimes we forget being with the P&W guys they make the jokes that we all have alien feet because almost none of us wear a D. That 85% of people buy D width shoes, whether it's their right size or not, and they make it work.
We were forced to this point,
Yep.
us with wider feet.
Yeah, that's legitimately 100% it. And it's funny too because we talk about this, but there's a lot of Facebook groups dedicated to the P&W stuff specifically, and whenever you see stuff go up for sale, 9 times out of 10, it's not a D width. It's usually a C, a double E, an F, or a double F. Very rarely is it just even a single E unless you get into the really long lengths.
And for good reason.
Yep.
The only other way, if you're not doing advertising, whether it be because you can't afford it or for whatever reason, but the only way you're going to hear about it is if you got certain celebrities that are wearing it. Like, I guess, is it Momoa? I think Momoa wears several pairs of Westco's.
He does.
So he really likes Westco.
He wears a pigeon.
Zach Wild. Zach Wild from
Black Label Society.
Obviously Ozzy Osbourne fame and Black Label Society. He's taken to Frank's and has had several pairs made by them. So they're probably getting some word of mouth in that respect.
Oh, I have no doubt. It's funny you mentioned that. I just threw up one of Dale's posts for the video on the Frank's Golf Green Wilshires. and I went ahead and tagged it to Frank's and Dale on it, and Michelle reposted on hers. Like I got like 16 new follows just in that alone. So I am sure for all the stuff he posts, since he always references Frank's in it, that has at least brought some eyes to people looking, if not buying.
What else we got? We kind of loosely covered grains: full grain, top grain, shoulder, skirt. Um, Rump.
We even covered the suede cuts.
We didn't cover belly because we don't want to cover belly. It's too soft. It's not something that we want. It's something that a shady builder would try to maybe throw in and sneak in on us, but luckily we don't deal with those.
Yep. No, bellies are meant for wallets and bags, nothing else. Now, when I say bags, I specifically mean like purses, like soft bags, not like like rugged carrying gear, like for your saddle or anything. It's meant for wallets and purses. That's what belly's purpose is in life. Otherwise, it's not worth tanning.
Finishing types, which again we've covered a little bit. I mean, you just mentioned rough out. I think we mentioned another place in the video. Rough out is literally just the rough side of the leather instead of the smooth side. It handles abrasives better, but it's also going to hold on to dust, like you said, concrete dust and stuff like that.
Mud, particulates,
a lot. It's a mess. It can be a mess. It's a lot better to be able, in my opinion, I think it's better to be able to wipe down a smooth leather. Personally, if it's a work boot, then I'm not really worried about the scratches, and I can wipe it down easy. But rough out is going to hold up better, longevity as far in general, and it's going to hide those initial smaller scratches.
Yep.
So that's got trade-offs. We've got waxed rough out, which is exactly as it sounds. It's the rough outside still, so it's going to cut down on the amount of cuts and scratches that are going to take hold. But they wax the living fuck out of it when it's still a flat hide, so that it almost looks smooth. It almost looks smooth out until you wear it and some of that wax starts growing off. You need to reapply the wax at times, and as a consumer, we can't reapply the wax as well as the tannery could initially.
Yep.
So it does end up looking a little bit fuzzy, which is good and bad. I mean, it's character.
With the particulates. It solves a lot of the particulates.
A lot of us like character.
Yep.
So you got dyed through hides versus hides that are only surface dyed.
Yeah, so
that's a
usually
factor
called struck through hides, or the term now, over dyed is the correct term. What do they call that? Struck through and T-core. T-core is the term they use for it. Now,
T-core, there you go.
The correct term that the tannery will use is overdyed, but T-core, so like Chrome XL is a T-core leather, where it just sits on the top. Wicket and Craig's English Bridal, same way. It's the finishing and top layer that's all the color. There's no color beneath. Actually, to be honest, I think almost all Wicket and Craig hides are T-core. I don't think many of them are struck through at all. I don't think I own a single Wicket and Craig that's completely struck through. Not that to say that they don't make them, but I know Oiled Latigo's not. I know Harness isn't. Neither is English Bridal. I have H Latigo laces, and those aren't struck through. They are finished on both sides though. So only the core is not struck through for H Latigo.
Would you say rub off is the same as T-core?
So
that's always been extremely popular with Doc Martens.
Yeah, that's what they call ghost leathers. It's not quite the same thing as T-core, but it's the same concept. So rub-off leathers, usually it's a wax layer, or they've put the original color down, a layer of finish, whatever they're using to finish it, whether that's a non-wax character finish that's going to be some kind of spray-on finish. Like for example, Saphir Super Invulner is technically a spray-on finish. It's not a protector; it's an actual finish. It's going to be a layer of finish, and then it's usually a colored wax or a layer of dye encapsulating by a clear wax, and that's what a rub off or a ghost leather is. A couple brands like Consaria Walloper have made it. Shinky has made ghost hides before, where they'll use a heavy white or a black wax over the top, and like a really deep penetrating one over a struck through hide to make a ghost leather where it rubs off in different capacities to give you depth, essentially. The downside to those like rub off and ghost leathers is they just get annihilated by water. Like all your rub off, the second it gets any kind of wet, will start bleeding away like crazy. It'll cause it to break down super quick. But that's technically ghost, but the concept of a T-core leather is the exact same concept. It just goes deeper than rub off. I think didn't Nike do one with like gobstoppers where it was a rub off leather like that too? I think they did. I think Nike did an Air Force One's collab with a gobstopper where like even on the outsole and the leather, as you wore it, it wore down like a gobstopper to the next color layer. I think they did. I'm pretty sure they did.
There's only been like a billion different kinds of Nike Air Jordans, so
yeah,
a little hard to keep track of them.
You're not wrong.
We didn't. It's probably not worth covering, but I guess we could mention stamped. A popular stamped grain that we would have seen over the years would be Scotch grain.
Yep, hatch grain, scratch grain, same thing.
AKA pebble grain.
Yep.
Which traditionally it means that hey this leather wasn't really good enough and it's got a lot of surface impurities. Let's stamp it for character so that we can sell it as a premium or just sell it without it looking bad.
Yeah. Well, and there's a couple
but it does look cool.
Yeah.
I've always loved the look of Scotch grain, and I've owned a lot of footwear that was Scotch grain.
I've seen hatch grain shell too. They've like Horween's done hatch grain shell where they emboss the hatch grain into shell cordovan, which wouldn't be my first choice, but like they do it. There's a lot of dress shoes made out of it.
That pebbled look for the Scotch grain, to me, it draws me in. I always like it when I see it. But being at the level now where I'm pretty much only buying MTO bootwear, it seems a shame because I know where it comes from. I know why it's done. And if I'm paying for a premium hide, why do I want it to look like I didn't do people who know what they're looking at?
Yeah, no, it's like embossed lizard. You see a lot of embossed lizard. That's the same thing. I mean, because there's two different ways to do that. There's tumbled hides, which they usually call derbies, which you'll see that the print isn't super uniform, and they'll just tumble the ever-living crap out of it to put it in, and it'll be a little bit more random pattern. And then there's the actual runs where it's ran under a hot iron that stamps the print in. But they all suffer from the same problem. Putting that print in or tumbling it removes temper, removes durability, and thins out parts of the leather that cause premature failure. That's kind of the big reality of the three. That's probably, I think, the biggest downside to using them in an MTO boot is you're making a boot that's going to have less life. I mean, most of these were originally set up for jackets, honestly.
What else we got? Shrunken,
Yep.
which is mostly bison, but we were just talking about Galan, and they've been doing some shrunken
Horse. Yep.
horse
Yeah,
lately.
Shinky shrinks their horse a little bit too. Now they've done some real shrunken horse that Law shrunk for them. It's kind of like I've never seen it ran again, and it's extremely rare. So if you can get shrunken Shinky, it's like grab it immediately because the chances of finding it again are probably second to none. But
When we see bullhide,
Yep.
it's often shrunken.
Yep, shark too. Now
We do see some shrunken.
Yeah.
Obviously, it limits the amount of boots that can be created with it. or
it
amount of
also
anything
causes
that
some spring back issues too. So anything that's shrunken, you've got to be real careful of it springing back to its original, like trying to go back to its original size, which can cause some weird sizing issues. Like Art's had issues with two pairs of his uh, law tanning, the blue Palisades and the black Bighorn. Both of his sprung back pretty hard and essentially came out a size too small. He just got the blue Palisades stretched the other day. So,
oh my.
and that's the second one because usually he's got like 3 fingers on the uppers. Like both the blue Palisades and his black Bighorn, he had almost a whole hand worth of gap. So he experienced bad spring back on both of those, but he didn't on his Cognac Monkeys. So now Art is also a 12.5 E. He's a very big foot. Always does 8-inch boots, so he consumes a ton of leather. Might be the portions of the hide playing in that a little bit, but shrunken hides do have some problems with springback. Cow in general can have springback problems, but that's combated by companies like Frank's and most bespoke makers, usually leaving the boots on the last between 2 and 6 weeks. Where that's a problem is machine lasted, which is Goodyear Welt boots, or builders that are really trying to crank out numbers, leaving it on the last 2 or 3 days. That's where springback is a big issue.
Which leaves different kinds of hides.
Yeah,
different kinds of animals. I mean, I just said bull.
Yep.
We've been talking about cow. We've been talking about bison. We've been talking about horse. We've mentioned kangaroo.
Ostrich is a real common,
maybe
especially cowboy boots.
Cowboy seats. We see a ton of ostrich. It's a really cool hide. It's very distinctive and a lot tougher than some people might realize.
Oh yeah, it's a pretty
Elephant. It's extremely tough.
Yes, elephant. More people make elephant than people know. They just don't post a lot of it on social media because PETA loses their minds.
F PETA. Who the fuck cares? Fuck you,
yeah,
PETA.
Hey,
but in their defense, and if they're listening, nobody's allowed to kill elephants anymore just because they want the hide. That stopped, I think, in 1989, 1990, something like that. These elephants are watched, and when they're about to die, the right people get told that an elephant is about to die naturally, and if you want the hide,
yep,
tan it.
The ones are done.
So they're not hurting anything.
Yep.
I'm sure the elephant would have loved to see its hide go to something after it died.
Well, the other thing too is elephant hides are huge.
And they're huge. So
yeah, they do 60, 70 pairs of boots out of a single hide. I mean,
and elephant is an extremely long-lasting leather. If you don't wear it out in some other way, it's probably a lifetime leather. It might keep you from needing to buy 5 other pairs of boots. PETA should be happy.
Oh yeah, especially since vegan leather in general is way worse for the environment than regular leather. Because the pollutant levels of veg tan leather are almost zero. Like the most pollutants you're going to get out of is from the machines operating, like the leather process. I can understand where someone maybe gets a little upset with chromium salt tanning, which is chrome tanning, even though it doesn't let off fumes. But in general, like leather tanning is a very low pollutant if you're not just dumping your chemicals in the water when you're done.
It's really not something we should have mentioned.
Probably not, but
it is true. I mean, we do live in a society. I mean, if PETA's going to be mad, the leather industry is misplaced anger.
Absolutely.
And there's no animals that are being killed for their hides. These animals are being killed whether they're being killed for food, or because they scared the fuck out of somebody, or because of overpopulation, population control. So yeah, we don't live in a society where anything is really being killed, at least not anymore, for the hide.
Yeah, deer hides. Deer hide's a good example of that. Any deer hide or deer skin, The reason it exists for so many things like gloves is because look at the Midwest. There's a bunch of states that you can get unlimited deer tags each year just due to rampant overpopulation. I mean, like the state of Iowa, for example, most men can get 3 to 5 tags each year, and you can have as many doe tags as you want. This is just how it works. And it, like I said, it's good to use the stuff that does get killed. That's the biggest part. Like, if an elephant's gonna die in the zoo, let's use it. Like, like ivory still has a purpose. We still restore 500-year-old pianos. They need ivory keys. Elephant, 110-year-old elephant dying in a zoo is a perfect example of how to get some beautiful ivory keys. Sorry, the dogs are look like they're starting about to do something in the background here. So
I haven't really owned a lot of personally. I had an old pair of cowboy boots, stand posts that were elk, and I can't even say I loved them to death because I actually now that I only do MTO and I need the arch. Uh, I owned those things for like 15 years, wore them quite often, resold them twice, rehealed them 4 times, and sold them on eBay last year for $60.
yeah, they're still going.
Uh, but I have owned gloves, and I've got some Kudu coming, which is African deer.
Yep. Kudu's interesting because it's a really buttery soft leather, but it's also very good at holding its shape. I have one pair of Kudu in the cloud color, and it is a slipper leather. Like it gives you that kind of at home slipper feel, but in a strange way. Like I said, it doesn't fold in on itself like Chrome XL. The temper is still higher than Chrome XL, even though it's buttery smooth. It reminds me a lot of kangaroo, though I think kangaroo holds its shape just a smidge better. But overall, Kudu does look really cool, if nothing else. You get to definitely see the life that it had, and the savannah is not a nice life.
It's hella cool on the inside too. If
Yeah.
you choose a rough out,
Yeah,
that's a really hard choice because it looks and feels so good as a rough out. But like you said, the character that it has on the outside, I could never do it.
Yep.
It's just the character's too strong. You got to have that out there.
Well, look at that green one that I have that I showed you the pictures of. Like, that's the first pair I've seen that's like, man, I don't think I can not get this in a rough out.
I drooled. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm eventually gonna have to own that one. Cayman, gator, snakes, but these aren't like boots that we would be making generally with the footwear that we usually choose to have built. But they are ones that are used on a regular basis, probably mostly with cowboy boots.
Yeah, even then, snake can't be a regular day wear. You'll destroy that hide. Cayman, I think Frank's has done a couple pairs. White's has done it in the past. If you take care of Cayman, it can last. It wouldn't be my choice. Like you're basically hoping the cartilage layers in between the scales survive long enough for you to be able to essentially, not tear apart. Because once the cartilage goes, the boot's going to tear. Like that's the whole flexing in Cayman, which is generally the only one that's tanned besides Prosaurus croc, which is saltwater crocodile. And that stuff's expensive. It's actually more expensive than shell cordovan because getting hides that are in good condition that don't have tons of scars or that cartilage isn't breaking down is difficult.
That reminds me of Stingray. I owned a pair of Stingray, and I could see myself doing Stingray in a PMW boot.
Oh, they would hate you.
I think it would. What?
They would absolutely hate you. That would be like hearing the nasty sound it's gonna make, and you're gonna dull all of their clicker dies clicking it out before they even last it. Oh man, I don't. They're definitely gonna hate you for that one. I could see them doing it, but I don't think they're gonna have a good time by the time that one's done because Stingray's extremely abrasive.
Oh, no doubt. We're talking like 40 grit sandpaper. Like
Right, it sounds like cutting
literally.
glass too. If you've ever cut it before, it sounds like you're cutting glass, like glass beads.
The first pair that I ever bought when I went into the boot store, I had never even heard of people using Stingray. And this guy is like, "Oh, you need to check out these Stingrays." He says, "Check this out." And he went and grabbed one off the shelf, and they had these long wooden pews that looked like they belonged in a church. And he just starts sanding down the wooden pew with
Yeah.
boots.
Yeah.
He says, "Do it as long as you want. Make all the sawdust you want. It's not going to hurt the boot." That is nuts.
Yeah. They use it a lot for handle hilts for like knives and swords and stuff. It's real popular for that because it's real grippy to your hand. But I mean, if Frank's got a cool colored Stingray and they were willing to work with it, I'd buy them boots. Only in the lowers. I don't think I'd do the uppers because I want my jeans to survive. I have some nice jeans, some selvage
That's
jeans.
true.
I would prefer to keep those intact because
They'd be shorts in no time.
Yes, exactly. The Stingray will wear through your jeans. There's no stopping that. I probably would even maybe avoid doing it in a heel counter too, just because I don't want it like tearing up the cloth on like the seats of my car, or the carpet, or the floor mats or anything. For when you're driving, I wouldn't want to have to worry about that either. Probably just do the lowers and the toe cap. Yeah, I know that.
Now that you mention it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now that you mention it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't be able to do the counter either.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. Rip through the jeans real quick.
Yep.
So it would just be the vamp.
Yep. Vamp toe cap. Just don't touch any of the plastic on your dashboard either, because it's gonna leave marks on it too. Stingray's cool though. It's a very cool leather. This is the thing when it comes to exotics, right? Like exotics take more care, they take more effort, more thought has to be put into them, and a ton of these exotics are extremely expensive. So you've got to be ready for those exotics for when the time comes. Like you want a pair of ostrich cowboy boots. I mean, good luck finding them under $800 on the shelf for ready to wear. These days, they're probably closer to $1,200 for the cheapest ones you'll find. And then, in the bespoke world, usually ostrich is $1,000 upgrade, whatever their base price is. So, I mean, a lot of these are expensive and they add a lot of price. You got to be ready for that stage if you're going into them. The only one I would say of these exotics that's like you could jump into right away and be fine with is Kudu. Because you can't get Kudu wrong.
We cover all of our objectives.
We mentioned like skirts, bellies, parts like that. That's not as important for the average boot buyer. That's important for like asking specific things of your builders or searching for specific hides. Realistically, when it comes to leather, shoulder is king. Sorry. For boots, shoulder is king.
If you trust your builder, your builder isn't going to use those parts of the hide, and they're going to tell you.
Correct.
So, like you said, we don't need to know it. The only reason you'd need to know it is if you were actually buying and supplying your own hides. And I know you've done that. But that is a step above for most people. Generally speaking, a step above for me. I haven't yet gone out and bought a hide myself and taken it to a builder and said, will you build me a hide? I don't personally want that responsibility for making sure that that hide is good enough so that they wouldn't come back to me and say, we can't build a boot out of it. And then I just wasted that money.
Challenge accepted. Black and brown shinky right there. I've got Crazy Cow Couple, which is green, and Deep Forest Elk Kudu in the closet. I had Samba, which is Crazy Cow Samba, which is red in the closet, but that's at Frank's at the moment. And then I think in the closet I might also have one more Shinky shell. Gabbard has 4 of the Shinky shells, but I think I still have the 5th Shinky shell in the closet.
I can't compare. I'm not worthy.
I mean, I don't even know if Frank's would take a hide from anybody besides me anymore anyway. I know Alex has tried recently, and Michelle keeps telling him no, so he's like, you got to tell me when you're buying something cool so I could go in with you.
I remember that conversation. Uh, I remember Michelle saying why she wasn't, and I remember saying to her, "Well, so that just means that Mike's the only one that's going to be able to do it." And she's basically like, "Yeah, well, he gets grandfathered in because he did a great job, but we got to put a stop to it because you
Yeah,
get too many hides coming in that aren't good enough."
yeah, they got a lot of shit hides. Well, and it's not just that too. Like all the stuff we just mentioned, you didn't need to know. You need to know when you're buying hides. Like you got to know the grades, you got to know the tempers, you got to know the colors, you got to know the thicknesses, you got to know the consistency of the tannery. And then we didn't talk a whole lot about finishes, but you've got wax finishes, you have spray on finishes, you have TPR finishes. Now we have to talk about pigment leathers versus aniline leathers, which are sink through dye. So anything struck through has to be
Um,
aniline. But you can have struck through with a pigment layer, but anything that's pure T-core is going to be pigment. Um, except for oil tanned like Chrome XL. Those are actually done with the aniline dye. They stuff the hides real thick with the oils and everything first. Use a stripping layer to take the top off. Get the top layer on with the color, and then refinish it the exact same way it was before they stripped it off. That's how they get that T-coring for Chrome XL. So, like all of these things play into it now because most builders do that aren't using machine lasting do wet lasting. So if you bought from someone that is a aniline struck through dye that happens to be water based, your dye is coming off now when they're soaking it. Like if they stick it in the ultrasound machine, it's coming off. If they spritz it with water and alcohol, it's stripping the color out onto somebody's hands while they're lasting it if it's a water based dye from the product. And these are things you've got to look for.
we didn't mention Latigo versus double.
Oh yeah. Okay, so that's a good example. So we're getting real deep in the knowledge that people may or may not need to know. So when you order from Wicket and Craig, and this is true for everybody, there's a concept that's called crust leather. Crust leather is the tanned product that is done and ready for finishing stages, whether that's dyeing, spray, whatever, doesn't matter. The tanning process is complete. The leather is not usable, but the tanning process is complete. So in the case of like chrome tanned leather, for example, the hide will be a light blue color. And this will be the point at which they either bleach it back to a leather color, which is like a light brown, like Chrome XL, or they leave it blue, and when you cut it, you see the blue core on the inside, right? So if it's chrome tanned, it's blue. If it's veg tan, depending on the veg tan, it's going to be a shade of brown, right? The crust leather usually is picked for various qualities for various lines. So in Wicket and Craig's case, harness and double stuff are going to be the lower quality crusts that are a little bit thicker, have a little bit more imperfections, and are going to do better with the saturation process that goes with it. The English Bridle and the oiled Latigo get a crust leather that's a lot better final product, less defects, tends to be summer hides versus winter hides. Winter hides have more fat lines and manure burns. And on top of it, do a lot better with the top layer. So they're going to absorb better. The difference is when Nick's got the double stuff made, double stuffed is a combination of two different processes. One, when you get oiled Latigo, it has a plastic film on it like shell cordovan that protects the leathers. If you peel it off and store it, what happens is that begins to evaporate. And if you let it set for 6 months, which Nicks and Whites are notorious for doing, and then you go try to last it, you'll most likely tear it because you didn't leave the film on it and the oils evaporate off. In the case of double stuffed, they have stuffed it so full of oils and stuff that it could set for 6 months, and it literally lubricates the machines as they run it through the sewers, the outsole stitchers, so on and so forth, because of the sheer amount of oil on it. Double stuffed was really a product of how Nick's wanted to store leathers, whereas like Frank leaves the cellophane cover on the oiled Latigo and has zero problems with it. It was just a choice essentially about how leather was meant to be stored, and the way the crust is that's used for oil. Yes, I know. Yeah, I know. The dog's doing her funny thing in the background.
No, 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 no. I'm not laughing at the dog. I'm laughing at how incredibly PC you're being right now.
Oh,
How
yep.
Nick's chose to store the leather.
I mean,
No.
you could call it bad
But the
housekeeping
real way to
practices.
say that is Nick's didn't want to or didn't know how to handle the leather careful enough. So they decided to put the onus on the tannery instead of themselves. And
Yes.
you actually end up with a hide that isn't as good, even though it seems exclusive. Ooh, that's exclusive. But it's actually not as good of a hide. I want Latigo any day
Yeah, you're not
over the
wrong.
double.
Because the crust for English bridle and that is just better quality, and it's derived around a slightly different concept, right? Like English bridle, the point of it is to absorb the horse's sweat but not take it into the core, which is why the oils flash off on oil Latigo, because it doesn't let all of it get down to the core in the same way that the harness leathers do. Because once again, harness is meant to be something entirely different. And the good news with double stuffed is they take all the practices that make oiled Latigo a specifically done boot leather and apply it to the harness crust. But it's still the not quite as good harness crust compared to the English bridle crust, which is what the oiled Latigo is made from. And like I said, it's built on not sucking everything through all the layers of the leather and protecting the core from that oil. That's what those crusts are meant for.
So there you go. We discussed that. I think we've covered everything. I can't think of any other treatments, any other personalities of leathers that we've missed. Different ways to treat it, different ways to age it, different time periods, different materials, ingredients.
I mean, this is pretty comprehensive to leather. The anything that would go outside of this, like the only thing we really didn't cover is hand dyed leathers, like the particular beauty you can get out of hand dyed leathers. But the reality is, um, there are, besides bespoke shoemakers in heritage boots, there are two people in the United States that will do it. So it's not worth talking about. And one of those guys just literally buys Phoebing's dyes, rubs it on there, lights it on fire, calls it a day. The other dude like ferments and takes care of the materials for 18 to 24 months before it gets applied to leather, and has a very strict like 200 part process of taking care of that leather. Which is why his stuff is sought after in the way that it is. You don't end up with a 4.5 year waiting list that Gabbard has by accident, especially at his boot prices.
We've covered leather.
Yep. That is the comprehensive guide of leather.
Hopefully, somebody will care enough to say something in the comments if we miss something.
Or if you have questions.
Try to answer it.
Yeah, if you have questions, if they're not answered in the comments, we could do a follow-up video with a list of questions if the questions get too long.
Questions, comments, yeah. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. We got at least 24 videos planned at this point that we're going to do. We are going to try to keep them as short as possible. This one is definitely going to be the longest one, but there was no way to cover leather completely without being longer.
Yeah, it comes to the territory. Like we are talking stuff specifically for leather boots, but it really is. If the last is the core of the boot, the first stage, like what makes the boot, the leather is the corresponding part that makes it whole. The rest is window dressing from that point.
Indeed. So, hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you found it entertaining and learned quite a bit. Hope we covered everything that we intended. I hope we didn't miss anything. This was free form, but I did have a few notes, and we covered my notes. Each thing in the future will be a specific area of a boot, and it'll be shorter because there's not as much to talk about in those areas. This is the most important part, leather.
Yep. Ton of the choices made here will affect how your boot lives, how it dies, how it breaks in, and the entire life of it. And we'll get into other pieces too as we go through these that can really make or break a boot for an individual in smart and bad choices. But this is really the beginning step. If this is the step that you miss or you try to rush, I mean, it all goes down from here. Like missing this step guarantees you a C grade at best. So,
Time to say goodbye.
time to say goodbye. With that, we're going to roll to the logo and hope everyone had a good day. I hope you guys enjoyed. As Jeff said, like, comment, subscribe, and any questions you have, if they can't be answered in the comments, we'll do a follow-up video and go over it.
Definitely.
All right. Have
All
a good day,
right.
everybody.
Cheers.